Vom continua acum pentru că am vorbit despre strategii și pentru că am văzut o mică parte din ceea ce reprezintă o strategie. Vorbim despre o disciplină sau de fapt despre un secret, l-aș numi eu, strategic doing, și din acest motiv îl voi invita în continuare pe Ed Morrison să vină aici pe scenă. Este de fapt ce ne va spune în următoarele minute. Ed Morrison, thank you so much for being here. Câteva cuvinte despre personalitatea sa. Este de fapt profesor și este fondator Strategy Lab, Agile Strategy Lab. Thank you so much. Good morning. Thank you for being here, and I'm very curious about your experience and about your expertise. Thank you. Please, at the microphone.
So I'm so happy to be here this morning. I want to take an opportunity to thank Marius, to thank my colleagues at Connects, and to thank you for coming here. I'm happy to share my experience, my journey. I want to take you on a journey into the future. I'm going to have 3 stops along the way. That's another way of saying that I have 3 points that I want to share with you. When we think about this new technology that we've just heard from about Ford, when we think about those new technologies, we tend to ignore one of the major risks involved in all of this. The major reason why we might not realize the power of this technology, and that's because our organizations may create a major obstacle, our organizations. And that's my first point. The biggest challenge to digital transformation is the disruption that we cause to our organizations. Our current organizations and how we manage them may be a major obstacle. Now, on to the second point. It's not just at the top of the organizations, but throughout our organizations that we may need to change. The transformation has to take place in our mindsets, in the way we think. That involves everyone in the organization. We need to move beyond rigid hierarchical thinking, and we need to start moving toward a network mindset. And that's the second stop in the journey that I'm going to take you on this morning. The third and final stop on this journey is a surprising one, I think. And that it turns out that when we adopt a new network mindset, we discover an important insight. And this insight is that in order to master these technologies, all of these technologies, we have to practice and master our oldest technology, which is our conversations. So in other words, in order to move down the path that Ford has shown us how to move down, we need to move toward digital maturity through improved organizations and improved conversations. Managers need to manage the complex conversations. So that's the journey I'm going to take you on in the future. 3 stops, so let's get started. What do I mean when I say that the biggest threat to our digital disruption is the organization itself? This insight comes from the differential rates at which humans deploy technology. Part of the challenge, of course, is that we develop technology at a faster rate than individuals are able to adopt it. And organizations adopt and deploy technology at a slower rate than individuals. So the problem is our organizations don't move fast enough to adopt the technologies that we're developing. Part of the challenge now that we have to address is how do we accelerate these technologies? As individuals adopt these technologies and as organizations adopt them faster, we'll be able to address these challenges. But how do we do that? Well, we need to change the way in which we think about our opportunities. In our work at Purdue University in the past year, we're exploring a host of the problems that these new technologies are creating for organizations. Artificial intelligence, for example, raises significant privacy concerns. The problem of worker surveillance. How do companies address this challenge? How do we use data instead of using it for control purposes, but for learning purposes and adaptation? How do we develop ethical practices for the use of these technologies? The flood of information through our organizations also does another thing, and that is that it changes the power structures within our organizations. It makes the boundaries of the organization more porous. How do we share this data? And with whom do we share it? How do we build new bonds of trust with all of the companies around us? We're learning that the best organizational form might not be the organization at all, but might be the ecosystem. So at Purdue, we're working on developing platforms and ecosystems that enable us to adopt these technologies faster. So let's move to the second stop on our journey. In our first stop, I told you that organizational change will be an obstacle for how fast we adopt these technologies. In the second stop, we'll explore this question: how can managers accelerate the transformation within their organizations? How can you transform your organization faster? And the answer to this question is embedded in the idea of mindsets, the idea of how we think about the future, how we create meaning in their experiences. Since the dawn of the industrial age, in the 19th century, we've organized our organizations vertically. We've organized them hierarchically. And it worked very, very well when we did that. But the flood of new data that's coming through, as we saw with Ford, the flood of new data moves through networks. It doesn't move through hierarchies. And so to adapt and survive and thrive in this new environment, our organizations have to move from hierarchies to networks. And we already know this, but we're moving too slowly. Why is that? Well, I suspect that the major reason that we are moving too slowly is fear. Fear. We're moving too slowly because we've already seen this before. We've already seen what happens when we inject new ideas into an old organization. It triggers an immune response. People fear the future. They fear change. They fear the loss of position and power. So moving toward networks presents a real challenge for our managers. It presents us with new ways of thinking, new ways of behaving, new ways of working together. Networks are faster, they're more agile, but they're more ambiguous and less clear. They're more circular and they're less linear. Power is more distributed across this network. Experiments displace routines. The future is less certain and it's less predictable. But we need to move toward a more network-based mindset if we're going to transform the organizations in Romania and take advantage of the technologies that are so rapidly developing. So let's move on to the third point and the last point of my journey. The paradox of all this is that in order to take advantage of these technologies, we have to master our oldest technology, which is our conversation. Now, why is that? Well, in 1993, Alan Weber, an editor at the Harvard Business Review, wrote a very good article called "What's So New About the New Economy?" Weber concluded that the key skill managers have to learn is the ability to manage conversations. It's how we generate and distribute our knowledge. Our conversations enable us to form collaborations we need to generate the solution to wicked problems. In the road ahead, we're going to face many of these wicked problems. These problems require us to work together in new and different ways. Over 20 years ago, the Canadian environmental scientist Thomas Homer Dixon talked about the ingenuity gap, He argued that the future is coming at us faster than we know. And we're not developing solutions to these future problems. So we have this ingenuity gap. The only way to overcome this ingenuity gap is to accelerate the volume and the velocity of our collaborations. Collaboration is a process of recombinant innovation. We generate solutions by combining our assets in new and different ways. We come together to generate solutions that no individual or organization can do by themselves. Through our collaborations, we can create these new solutions to our most difficult problems. We can close that ingenuity gap. Over the last 30 years, we've learned that collaborations emerge from conversations with a very predictable structure. We can teach the skills of collaboration. We can increase both the volume and velocity of our collaborations, and through these collaborations, we can generate solutions to our most difficult problems. So that's the third stop on our journey. Well, it might seem that this journey into the future with 3 stops is new, but it's not really. I know much about this journey because I started on this journey in 1993. And it wasn't about Industry 4.0 or Industry of the Future. In 1993, I was sitting in a coffee shop in Singapore talking to a physicist who was the chief technology officer of one of our client companies. We were discussing the traditional management practice of strategic planning and why it was failing. We're not keeping pace with the accelerating pace of globalization that was happening, that was sweeping across the world, primarily with the Chinese economy, but also with other economies as well. Strategic planning based on hierarchical thinking wasn't working. And my physicist friend told me to abandon this old thinking. He told me that the internet was coming and that would change everything. The internet, he told me, was the first interactive mass medium. Then he told me that in order to understand the impact of the internet, in order to understand how we humans adjust, I should study open source software development. Through open source software development, software engineers can do complex work in open, loosely connected networks by following some simple rules. They can innovate in open networks where nobody can tell anybody else what to do. He advised me to learn the lessons of open source software development and understand how they might apply to the world of strategy. In specific terms, he challenged me to develop a new strategy discipline for networks. So I started out on my journey in 1993. I started out with the transformation of the economy of Oklahoma City. When we started, Oklahoma City was an economy that was flattened by the collapse of oil prices. Now, 30 years later, it's an economy that's become an entrepreneurial hotspot. Through 7 years of work in rural Kentucky, I learned how rural communities could address the challenges of globalization. I also learned how I could take the lessons of Oklahoma City and move those lessons from Oklahoma City to Charleston, South Carolina. In 2001, we launched the Charleston Digital Corridor. Now it's one of the hottest hubs for digital businesses in the United States. Through these many experiments, I learned that yes, we can accelerate our capacity to collaborate. We can collaborate and increase the volume and velocity of these collaborations by following some simple rules. We can generate new solutions to these complex problems. But at first we need to know what these skills are. And the skills are all based on our conversations. In 2005, after 12 years of experimenting, I went to Purdue University to learn how to teach this new model of collaboration. I reached an agreement with my colleagues at Purdue to open source the intellectual property underneath this model. And the reason was simple, because we as humans need to accelerate our capacity to collaborate. The only way to do that, following the model of open source software, was to provide this model to everybody. So I thought it would take me about 3 or 4 years to validate this approach and learn how to teach it. It turns out it's really hard to do. It took 15 years. We ran rigorous test beds with Lockheed and NASA, with research scientists at Purdue, and with community leaders in places like Flint, Michigan. We addressed complex problems. Can we develop a technology roadmap for condition-based maintenance across the Navy's destroyer fleet? Can we launch a cluster of freshwater technology companies that could become a global hub for these technologies? Can we reduce teenage homicides in Flint, Michigan? Can we help communities improve health outcomes with new solutions for opioid addiction and infant mortality? The good news is that we can now teach people how to collaborate. And we can do this more effectively by following these simple rules. And this is not just for software engineers or research scientists, it's for everyone. From elementary school teachers to high school students to NASA life scientists. You can think of strategic doing as an open source operating system for human collaboration. This discipline is now spreading across the world. We teach it in Spanish and Dutch and French and Chinese. We accelerate the collaboration among research scientists and community health professionals. We apply these approaches at small and large scales, from primary schools to Alberta, the province in Canada. To understand that final story, let me share one more. I met Julio Jose Prado at Purdue in 2017. Julio was a professor, a business professor, who was an expert in clusters. He earned his doctorate studying clusters. Then he came to Purdue to learn about strategic doing. When I asked him why he flew all the way from Ecuador to Indiana, he told me this. For years, he said, we've known about the importance of clusters, how collaboration among companies within these clusters accelerate productivity. But no one has told us how to build these clusters. Strategic doing answers the question, how? How? So in March 2021, President Lasso of Ecuador appointed Julio as a new Minister of Production and Trade. Julio sent me a message in LinkedIn. He said, how can we spread strategic doing across Ecuador? So here we are near the end of my 30-year journey and the beginning of your journey. We know that our human organizations and our economic policies have not kept pace with technology. We know that we face very complex challenges ahead. But now, unlike 1993, we have an open source operating system that can help us respond. It can accelerate collaborations that we need. We can generate new solutions to really complex problems. We can close the ingenuity gap. We can build for our children and our grandchildren an economy that is more open and more fair, more resilient, and more sustainable. Julio is doing this in Ecuador. You can do the same in Romania. But first, we need to practice and master the new skills of our oldest technology, our conversations. We need to master the skills of strategic doing. Thank you.